Lily, stop being naive. Everything that belongs to this family now belongs to me and my children." The words of my stepmother hit me like a slap across the face, cold and venomous, leaving me in disbelief. I stood there, silent, feeling a numbness spread through my body. I had tried so hard to keep everything together, to protect this family after my mother's death, but now I realized that it had all been for nothing. My stepmother had succeeded in capturing my father's heart, and now she wasn't just taking him, she wanted everything I held dear. "I know you're heartbroken," she continued, her eyes full of mockery. "But this is how things work. You promised to take care of the family, but I'm the one who deserves to be in charge now, right?" I took a deep breath, keeping my hands from shaking. My cold demeanor never wavered as I looked her straight in the eye, as if I had been prepared for these words all along. "You may take everything from me," I replied, my voice soft but laced with malice. "But you will never have my father's trust, and you will never destroy what my mother built." I turned and walked away, but inside, I had already set a plan in motion, a battle no one would expect. I had never expected that a single conversation could shake me to the core. After everything my family had been through, after all the promises, the sacrifices, the years spent holding everything together, this moment felt like a betrayal. I had always known that Jessica, my stepmother, was not as sweet and innocent as she pretended to be. But hearing her speak so openly about taking control of my family's fortune, about claiming what was rightfully mine, made my blood run cold. My father had always been a strong, proud man, and I had always admired him for it. But somewhere along the way, he had fallen under Jessica's spell. I watched him for days after the conversation, wondering how someone I had trusted so much could be so easily manipulated. As the days passed, I noticed small changes in the house, subtle enough that most people would overlook them. Jessica had started taking over more and more of the family affairs, making decisions without consulting my father. I found her going through my mother's old belongings, as though she were searching for something that belonged to her. There was no respect for the legacy my mother had left behind, no respect for the promises she had made to me, to the family. It was almost too much to bear, and yet I knew I had to keep my composure. If I lost control now, I would lose everything. I had to be strategic, patient, and methodical. The plan I had been forming in the back of my mind for weeks would have to be set into motion, and I had to make sure no one knew what I was truly thinking. The first step in my plan was simple. I needed information. I needed to understand exactly what Jessica was up to, what she was planning, and I knew the perfect place to start: my father's office. His office had always been a sanctuary for him, a place where he could go to think, to work, and sometimes to escape the chaos of family life. But recently, it had become something else. A sanctuary for Jessica, where she would spend hours at a time, coming and going at her leisure. I had caught her more than once slipping in and out of that office, always with a look of triumph on her face, as though she were hiding something. I couldn't let her continue to use my father's office as her playground. I had to find out what she was doing in there. That night, when my father went out for one of his long walks, I made my move. I quietly entered his office, careful not to make a sound. The room smelled faintly of leather and old books, the kind of smell that made me feel safe when I was younger. But tonight, it felt foreign, almost suffocating. My heart was pounding in my chest as I looked around, trying to find something, anything, that would give me a clue as to Jessica's true intentions. I didn't have much time. I quickly went through his desk drawers, scanning each one for anything out of the ordinary. Papers, old bills, letters from friends and colleagues, nothing that seemed out of place. But as I reached the last drawer, something caught my eye. A small, leather-bound folder. I pulled it out and opened it slowly, my breath catching in my throat as I flipped through the pages. The contents were shocking, documents outlining the transfer of assets, the signing of legal papers that would give Jessica control of everything. I stared at the papers, my mind racing. This was it. This was the proof I needed to confront her, to expose her for the fraud she truly was. But as I read through the documents again, I realized something. This wasn't just about money. This was about power. Jessica wanted to take everything from me, to erase my mother's legacy, and to claim it as her own. I closed the folder, my fingers trembling. This wasn't just a battle for my family's wealth. It was a war for the very heart of my family, for everything my mother had fought for. and I was going to make sure that Jessica would not win. I returned the folder to its place, making sure everything was exactly as I had found it. As I left my father's office, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm. The battle was just beginning, but I was ready for it. And this time, I wouldn't be the one who lost. Tomorrow, I would make my next move, and Jessica wouldn't know what hit her. The following day, I woke with a sense of resolve unlike anything I had ever felt before. The documents I found in my father's office were the key to everything, but the game had only just begun. Jessica had no idea that I was on to her, and that was precisely the advantage I needed. I wasn't going to rush. I was going to take my time, study her every move, and make sure my plan was executed flawlessly. I spent the entire morning pretending everything was normal. I acted as though nothing had changed, as though I hadn't uncovered the sinister truth behind Jessica's actions. My father, unaware of the storm brewing, greeted me warmly as he always did. He asked how I was doing, as if nothing had happened. I smiled and answered, but it felt like the words were coming from someone else, someone who was playing a role. In a way, I was no longer just Lily, his daughter. I had to become something else. A strategist, a shadow, someone who could outsmart Jessica without her even knowing it. By afternoon, Jessica was already making her rounds in the house, chatting with the staff and laughing with my father, as though she was the rightful matriarch of the family. It made my stomach churn to see her act so carefree, so certain that she had already won. But I was patient. I watched her, carefully observing her every movement. I needed to understand her patterns to see where she would slip up. It didn't take long before I realized something crucial. Jessica had a routine. She always went for a walk in the garden at exactly the same time every afternoon, her head buried in her phone, her eyes never straying from the screen. I had seen her leave the house at 3 p.m. without fail, and I realized that this was my window. She wasn't as meticulous as she thought. I was going to use that to my advantage. I spent the next few days pretending to be completely absorbed in my own life, all the while tracking Jessica's every movement. My father was still oblivious to the growing tension. I had to be careful not to reveal my hand too soon, so I bided my time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, there would be obstacles along the way, but I was ready for whatever came next. That afternoon, as planned, Jessica left for her daily walk, phone in hand. I watched her slip out of the house through the back door, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. As soon as she was out of sight, I moved. The garden was my destination. It was a place I'd always loved when I was younger. My mother used to take me there, teaching me about the flowers and plants she adored. It was where I'd spent most of my childhood, feeling safe, feeling loved. But now, it felt like a battlefield, a place where everything I had once cherished was slipping away, piece by piece. I approached the small shed at the back of the garden, a place my father had used for storing tools. It was old, but still functional. I had noticed that Jessica had been spending time around it recently, but I hadn't thought much of it until I saw her slip something into the shed one afternoon. A key, I had no doubt now. Jessica had been hiding something, likely the next step in her plan to take control of the family's assets. I knew I had to get into that shed, and I knew the key was hidden somewhere in her personal belongings. But where? I took a deep breath, trying to calm the rising excitement in my chest. The key had to be in her room. It was a risk, but it was one I had to take. Later that evening, after dinner, I went up to her room under the pretense of needing to borrow some personal items. Jessica had always been a bit of a control freak, and I knew she kept everything in its place. I had to act like I was just another daughter looking for something trivial, so I knocked and waited for her to let me in. "Come in, Lily," she called from inside. Her voice was sweet, but I could hear the undercurrent of smugness that always seemed to slip through when she thought she had the upper hand. I stepped inside, pretending to be casual as if I didn't have a care in the world. "I was just looking for a hairbrush. Do you mind?" She smiled, nodding toward her vanity. "Of course, help yourself." I moved toward the vanity, my eyes scanning the room for the key. Her room was meticulously organized, just like everything else in her life. But then I saw it, a small, ornate box on the shelf. It looked out of place among her otherwise pristine decor. I walked over to it, pretending to look at a picture frame beside it. My heart pounded as I reached for the box. Inside, there it was. The key. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed it quickly, slipping it into my pocket as I turned away, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Thanks, Jessica," I said, offering her a tight smile before heading toward the door. "I'll bring it back tomorrow." She waved dismissively, her attention already back on the book she was reading. I could almost hear her thoughts. She had no idea what was coming. That night, I returned to the shed with the key, my mind racing. This was it. This was where the final pieces of Jessica's scheme would be exposed. With each step I took toward the shed, I could feel the tension building, but I held on to my calm exterior. I was no longer the daughter who was pushed aside. I was the one in control now. Unlocking the shed door, I stepped inside, holding my breath. What I found inside would change everything. The shed smelled faintly of old wood and earth, a reminder of the many seasons it had weathered. I couldn't help but feel a rush of anticipation as I stepped inside, the dim light from the setting sun streaming through the small window at the top. The air was thick with the scent of the plants and soil from the garden just outside, but none of that mattered right now. What mattered was what I was about to uncover. The key I had stolen from Jessica's room slid smoothly into the lock, and with a soft click, the door creaked open. The shed was a mess of old gardening tools, broken pots, and bags of soil. At first glance, it seemed like nothing more than a place for discarded items. But I knew better. Jessica wouldn't be spending so much time here unless it was hiding something important. My eyes scanned the cluttered space, looking for anything out of the ordinary. I moved past the tools, carefully avoiding the dust and cobwebs that seemed to have accumulated in every corner. There, in the far corner of the shed, was a large, worn-out box. It was old, its edges frayed, but there was something about it that stood out, something that told me it was hiding something far more significant than just gardening supplies. I approached the box cautiously, my heart racing with every step. As I knelt down and lifted the lid, I could feel my hands trembling, not from fear but from the adrenaline coursing through me. Inside, I found what I had been searching for. A stack of papers, neatly organized, with official-looking seals on the top. I pulled out the first sheet and immediately recognized the signature on it, my father's. It was a legal document, one I knew had been forged without his knowledge. It outlined the transfer of a substantial portion of our family's assets, real estate, investments, the family business, all moving into Jessica's name. My mind reeled as I scanned the pages. There were more documents, each one more damning than the last. I couldn't believe it. Jessica had been systematically taking control of everything my family had built, using my father's name to sign away what belonged to us. It wasn't just a matter of wealth. This was about erasing my mother's legacy, about turning our family into something it had never been, a mere tool for Jessica's ambitions. I took a deep breath, my fingers gripping the papers tightly. This was it, the proof I needed to expose Jessica for the manipulative, deceitful woman she was. But as I flipped through the stack, something else caught my eye. A small envelope, tucked at the very bottom of the box, sealed with a red wax stamp. My curiosity piqued, I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, written in my father's handwriting. The words on the page made my blood run cold. "Lily, my dear, if you are reading this, then it means things have already begun to unravel. I have been deceived, blinded by someone I trusted. Jessica has been manipulating me, and I fear I have allowed her to take too much. This letter is my confession. I never meant for it to go this far, but I can no longer ignore the truth. The assets I've signed over, the decisions I've made, none of it was truly my choice. I've been coerced into this, and I beg of you, do not let her destroy everything." My hands shook as I read the letter again, the realization settling over me like a heavy weight. My father had known. He had known what was happening, but it seemed he had been too weak to fight back. Perhaps he had believed that by signing these papers, he was protecting me, but it was all a lie, a web of lies woven by Jessica. I sat back on my heels, the letter still clutched in my hands. The fury bubbling inside me was unlike anything I had ever felt before. My father was a victim, yes, but he had allowed himself to be manipulated. And now it was up to me to right the wrongs, to ensure that Jessica's betrayal didn't tear apart the last remnants of our family. I took one final look at the shed, taking in the dim light and the shadows that seemed to stretch across the room. The silence was deafening, but it was also the calm before the storm. The pieces were finally in place, and I knew what I had to do next. I couldn't allow Jessica to continue her reign of manipulation and deceit. But the path ahead would not be easy. I would have to confront my father, expose Jessica's lies, and fight for what was rightfully mine. But I was ready. I stood up, taking one last look at the papers and the letter before carefully placing everything back into the box. I locked the shed door and slipped the key back into my pocket, a determined fire burning in my chest. The game had changed, and now it was my turn to take control. Tomorrow, I would confront Jessica, and this time, I wouldn't be the one who lost. The night felt endless as I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The papers in my pocket burned with significance, a tangible reminder of the battle I was about to fight. I had gathered the proof, uncovered the truth, but the hardest part was still ahead. I had to confront my father, expose Jessica, and reclaim my family. I couldn't afford to wait any longer. Every day that passed brought Jessica closer to securing her hold over everything. My father was still unaware of the full extent of her manipulation. I had no choice but to act now. At breakfast the next morning, the atmosphere in the house felt different. I could almost taste the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Jessica sat across from me, her usual smile fixed in place, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that told me she sensed that I was no longer the naive daughter she had once deceived. "Good morning, Lily," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with false kindness. "I trust you slept well." I forced a smile, offering her a polite nod. "As well as can be expected," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. But inside, my blood was boiling. She had no idea what I was about to do. Her complacency only fueled the fire inside me. I was no longer afraid of her, and I certainly wasn't going to let her take everything from me without a fight. I kept my gaze steady on her as I picked up my coffee cup, pretending to sip it, but my mind was already racing. I had to bide my time, wait until I could speak to my father alone. This wasn't a conversation I could have in front of Jessica. No, I needed to confront him privately, to show him the truth before it was too late. After breakfast, I followed my father out to the garden, where he often went to escape the chaos of the house. The morning sun was already beginning to climb higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. It was a peaceful scene, but the calmness only added to the intensity of what I was about to do. "Dad," I said, my voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency, "can we talk for a moment? In private." He turned to me, raising an eyebrow in mild surprise. "Of course, Lily. What's on your mind?" I led him to a secluded bench beneath an old oak tree, away from the prying eyes of the house. It felt like the right place for this conversation, like a small sanctuary where the truth could be revealed. Once we were seated, I didn't waste any time. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the stack of papers I had found in the shed. I placed them on the bench between us, watching my father's face closely as I began to speak. "Dad," I began, my voice calm but firm, "I know everything. I know what Jessica has been doing. And I know that she's been taking control of everything, our family's assets, our business, without your full knowledge or consent." My father's face paled, and I could see the shift in his expression. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the papers, his gaze flicking over them in shock. "No, Lily. This can't be right. I would never," he began, but his voice faltered. I cut him off, my words sharp and direct. "You've been manipulated, Dad. I don't blame you for it. Jessica is very good at what she does, but she's been using you. Using us, and now she's taken everything." He looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion and hurt. "But I didn't mean to. I thought I was doing what was best for the family. I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me," I echoed, my voice rising with the frustration I had been holding back. "You didn't protect me, Dad. You let her tear everything apart. She's been planning this for months, making decisions without you, signing away our future, and now we're on the verge of losing it all." My father's face twisted with guilt, his hands gripping the papers tightly as he continued to read through them. I could see the pain in his eyes as the reality of what had happened sank in. I don't know what to say," he murmured, his voice shaky. "I've been so blinded by her. I thought I was making the right choices, but I didn't see it. I didn't see her for who she really is." I nodded, feeling a knot tighten in my chest. "It's not too late, Dad. We can still fix this, but we need to act fast. We need to expose Jessica for the fraud she is. I've got everything. We need to make sure she doesn't get away with this." For the first time in what felt like ages, I saw a flicker of determination in my father's eyes. He looked up at me, his voice steadying as he spoke. "You're right. I've made mistakes, and I've let things get out of hand. But I won't let her destroy what your mother built. I won't let her take you from me." Relief washed over me, and I felt a spark of hope ignite within me. This wasn't over. We still had a chance to fight back. As I stood up from the bench, I turned to face my father. "We need to confront her. Together, we'll expose everything and we'll take back control." My father nodded, his expression firm. "We'll do this, Lily. I won't let her get away with it." And for the first time in months, I felt like I had my father back. The battle was far from over, but we had a plan. We were ready to face Jessica head-on and take back everything that was rightfully ours. The storm was coming, and I was prepared for it. The air was thick with tension as I prepared for the confrontation with Jessica. The weight of what was about to happen pressed down on me, but there was no turning back. I had already made my decision, and I had my father by my side. Together, we would expose Jessica for who she truly was. But there was still one piece of the puzzle left to complete. Jessica had to be cornered, forced into a situation where she couldn't escape the truth. That evening, after dinner, I knew the time had come. I could feel my heart racing as I watched Jessica interact with my father. She was her usual self, charming, sweet, with that fake smile plastered on her face. She had no idea what was about to hit her. I made sure my father and I were positioned so that we could speak privately in front of her. This had to be done in a way that left no room for her to manipulate the situation. I didn't want to give her the chance to spin this in her favor. My father was already fully aware of what Jessica had been doing, but he still needed to see the full extent of her deception. He needed to hear it from her own mouth. "Jessica," I began, my voice steady but cold. She turned toward me, her eyes lighting up with that familiar gleam of superiority. "Yes, Lily, is everything all right?" Her voice was syrupy sweet, but I could hear the tension beneath it. She knew something was off, but she had no idea how much trouble she was in. "I think it's time we had a little talk," I said, locking eyes with her. "Don't you agree, Dad?" My father cleared his throat, nodding slowly. He was standing by my side, his posture tense. There was no backing down now. "What talk?" Jessica asked, feigning innocence as she crossed her arms, but I could see the flicker of nervousness in her eyes. She had started to realize that this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. "We know what you've been doing, Jessica," my father said, his voice firm, almost as if he had been preparing for this moment. "I know what you've been hiding from me, from Lily, and I can't let you continue with this charade any longer." Jessica's face went pale, and for the first time, I saw a crack in her perfect facade. She tried to smile, but it was forced, and I could see the panic creeping into her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but I was quicker. "You thought you could deceive us, Jessica," I continued, stepping closer. "You thought you could take everything from us, the family's wealth, the business, the house, but you were wrong. We have everything we need to prove your lies." She stammered, clearly flustered now. "Lily, I don't know what you're talking about. You're just misunderstanding things." I held up the papers, the ones I had found in the shed. "Misunderstanding? You've been forging documents, transferring everything into your name, and you've been using my father to do it. You've been manipulating him, taking advantage of his trust and his grief after my mother's death. But it stops now." Her face twisted into an expression of pure fury, and she took a step forward, her eyes narrowing dangerously. "You think you can just come in here and accuse me of all of this? You think I'd do something like that? You're just a child, Lily. You don't understand the things I had to do to make sure this family stayed together after your mother's death. You call it staying together?" I snapped. "You've been destroying everything that my mother built. You've been taking everything that doesn't belong to you, and I'm not going to stand by and watch you tear this family apart any longer." Jessica's lips trembled, her composure breaking as the weight of my words hit her. She had no answer, nothing to say in her defense. I could see the panic rising in her eyes, the fear she had been hiding all along. She had underestimated me, underestimated what I was capable of. She had assumed that I was just the naive daughter, the one who didn't have the strength to stand up to her. But I wasn't that girl anymore. "I've made my decision," my father said, his voice strong and clear. "Lily is right. You've taken advantage of my grief and I let it happen. But no more. I'll undo everything you've done. The assets will be returned to their rightful owners, and your manipulations will end here." Jessica took a step back, her face twisting in anger. You think you can just take everything away from me? I've worked hard for this. You'll regret this, both of you. You have no idea what you're up against." But this time, there was no more room for threats. My father had already made his decision. "You'll leave this house by the end of the week. And you'll take nothing with you," he declared, his voice resolute. "You've overstayed your welcome." For a long moment, Jessica stood there, frozen in shock. It was as if the reality of the situation hadn't fully hit her until now. She had always thought she was in control, but in the end, it was my father who had the final say. "I'll leave," she spat, her voice filled with venom. "But you'll regret this. You've made a powerful enemy, Lily." I didn't flinch. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Jessica. You've lost." She stormed out of the room, leaving my father and me standing together in the silence that followed. The weight of the moment settled over me, but there was a sense of relief, too. The battle had been long, but it was finally over. "I'm sorry, Lily," my father said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have protected you better." I shook my head, my heart full of both anger and compassion. "It's over now, Dad. We'll rebuild. We'll be stronger for it." For the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had taken back control of our lives, and this time, we would do it right. The storm had passed, but the scars of what had happened would remain. But now, I knew that no one, not even Jessica, could tear our family apart again. The days following Jessica's departure were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and an overwhelming sense of both relief and exhaustion. My father had begun the long process of reversing the fraudulent transfers, reinstating the family business, and slowly but surely reclaiming what had been stolen from us. It wasn't easy. There were legal battles to fight, contracts to void, and most of all, the lingering doubt that Jessica might still have a few tricks up her sleeve. But we were no longer standing on shaky ground. We had the truth, and that was all we needed to set things right. It was strange, though, despite the sense of justice, there was also a feeling of emptiness. The house felt quieter without Jessica's presence, but also less tense, less toxic. In the months she had spent here, I had become used to the oppressive atmosphere she created, the way she subtly manipulated everyone around her. But now, without her, the house felt like it was slowly breathing again, returning to a state of normalcy we hadn't seen in years. Still, I knew it wasn't over. The damage had been done, and there were scars that couldn't be erased. My father had changed in ways I didn't expect. He seemed distant, lost in thought, sometimes caught in the past, mourning not just the loss of my mother, but also the time he had lost to Jessica's deceit. I could see it in his eyes. He blamed himself for not recognizing her manipulation sooner. But I couldn't blame him. He had been vulnerable, grieving, and she had known exactly how to exploit that. It wasn't his fault. One evening, as we sat in the living room after dinner, I decided to address it. It had been a few weeks since Jessica's departure, and things were beginning to settle, but I could still feel the heaviness between us. I knew my father was struggling. "Dad," I began gently, placing my hand on his arm, "you don't have to do this alone, you know." He looked up at me, his tired eyes meeting mine. There was so much unspoken in that gaze, guilt, regret, and perhaps a little bit of shame. But there was also a flicker of hope, a small spark that hadn't been there before. "I know, Lily," he said softly, "but it's hard. I should have seen it. I should have protected you better, protected us better." I shook my head, squeezing his arm reassuringly. "You can't change the past, Dad. None of us can, but we can move forward together." He let out a long sigh, rubbing his temples as if trying to ease away the weight of his thoughts. "I don't know where to start, Lily. It feels like so much has been lost." "We start by rebuilding," I said firmly. "We start with what we still have. We have each other. We have the business. We have the house. And most importantly, we have the chance to make things right. We'll do it slowly, one step at a time." He nodded, a small, grateful smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You're right, I'm just tired, but I'll try, for you and for your mother." I smiled back, feeling a sense of warmth spread through me. It wasn't going to be easy, but we had made it through the hardest part. The road ahead was long, and there would be bumps along the way, but we would get through it. Together. Over the next few weeks, I worked alongside my father to restore the family business to its rightful place. I handled the finances, dealt with the lawyers, and began reaching out to the employees who had been affected by Jessica's manipulations. It wasn't glamorous work, but it felt good to have a sense of purpose again. We were slowly but surely repairing the damage she had done. But even as I worked tirelessly to restore order, I knew there was one more thing I needed to do. One last loose end to tie up. Jessica hadn't just taken my family's wealth, she had taken my peace of mind. She had stolen a part of me that I wasn't sure I could ever get back, but I wasn't going to let her get away with everything. I needed closure. And that meant confronting her once again. I hadn't heard from her since she left, but I knew that she wouldn't just disappear. She was too proud, too determined to reclaim what she thought was hers. So I made a decision. I was going to find her, face her one last time, and make sure she knew that she hadn't won. I had no idea where Jessica had gone after leaving the house. I didn't care either. I knew she'd be hiding somewhere, planning her next move. But I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of leaving without a final confrontation. I spent hours researching, tracking down leads, and asking around until I finally found out where she had gone. A small, upscale apartment in the city. It wasn't much, but I knew it was enough for her. It was the kind of place that would give her the illusion of independence, a place where she could lick her wounds and plot her next move. The next morning, I drove to the apartment. My father had urged me not to go, told me it wasn't worth it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to face her, that this final confrontation would give me the peace I needed to move on, to finally close this chapter of my life. I stood in front of her apartment door, my heart pounding. I had no idea what to expect, but I was ready. When the door opened, Jessica stood there, her expression cold and guarded. She didn't seem surprised to see me, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, recognition, maybe, or guilt. Well, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Lily Davis, here to finish what you started. I stepped forward, my gaze steady. No, Jessica, I'm here to finish what you started, and I'm here to make sure you never hurt anyone again. She narrowed her eyes, but I could see that the fire she once had was dimming. She had been defeated, and she knew it. Don't come back, I said, my voice unwavering, and don't ever think you'll have a place in my family again. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she turned away, shutting the door quietly behind her without another word. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door. But as I turned to leave, I felt a sense of finality. The last piece had fallen into place. I was free. When I got back to the house, I felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The damage was done, but we were moving forward. And no matter what happened next, I knew one thing for sure. I would never let anyone, not even Jessica, tear my family apart again. The road ahead was still long, but now I could finally breathe again. The weeks after my final confrontation with Jessica were filled with quiet progress. The house, once again, was a place of peace. There was still work to be done, so much work, but it felt different now. The weight of Jessica's presence, her manipulation, and her deceit had lifted. We were no longer living under the shadow of her lies. My father and I had started to rebuild our relationship, piece by piece. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't instant. There were still moments of silence, times when he would retreat into himself, lost in thoughts of the past. But slowly, we were finding our way back to each other. He was trying, and so was I. I knew he still blamed himself for everything that had happened, but I made it clear to him every day that it wasn't his fault. He wasn't the one who had betrayed us. Jessica had done that. She had preyed on his grief, his vulnerability, but he wasn't to blame. We were both victims of her deception, and together, we would recover. The business was starting to show signs of life again. We had hired new staff to replace those who had left under Jessica's influence, and my father had taken a more active role in the day-to-day operations, something he hadn't done in years. There was a spark in his eyes now, determination, purpose. It was the first time in a long while that he seemed truly alive. I was working closely with him, overseeing the finances, reviewing the legal documents, making sure everything was running smoothly. It wasn't glamorous work, but it felt right. I felt like I was finally contributing, like I was reclaiming my place in the family business. My mother's legacy wasn't lost after all. We would make sure of it. But there was still something missing, a piece of me that hadn't healed. As much as I tried to focus on rebuilding, there were nights when I lay awake, haunted by what had happened. The betrayal, the manipulation, the time I had lost. There was a part of me that couldn't move past it, couldn't stop wondering how things might have been different if Jessica had never entered our lives. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, looking out over the garden. The house was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. My father had retreated to his study, probably buried in more paperwork. It was always the same, endless work, endless repairs. But it was the only way we knew how to fix things. I needed to get away, even if just for a few hours. I needed to clear my mind. I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door, making my way down the familiar path that led to the beach. Miami's coastline was just a short walk from our house, and I often found solace in the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. It was a place where I could think, where I could breathe without the weight of everything pressing down on me. The evening sky was painted in hues of orange and purple as I walked along the beach, the cool breeze brushing against my skin. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to just be. No planning, no scheming, no fighting back, just silence. As I stood at the edge of the water, the waves lapping at my feet, I couldn't help but think about how much I had changed, how much everything had changed. I had been so consumed by my need for revenge, for justice, that I had lost sight of who I was, of what I wanted. It wasn't just about taking back what was mine anymore. It was about reclaiming my own peace of mind, my own sense of self. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, letting the salty air fill my lungs. In that moment, I realized that I didn't need to carry the weight of the past with me anymore. Jessica had taken so much from us, but she hadn't taken everything. She hadn't taken my will to move forward, to rebuild my life, to forge a new path. When I opened my eyes, I looked out at the horizon, the ocean stretching out before me, endless and full of possibility. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. The road ahead was still uncertain, and there would be more challenges to face, but I was no longer afraid. I had survived. My family had survived, and that was enough. I returned home later that evening, my mind clearer, my heart a little lighter. I walked through the front door, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a stranger in my own house. I felt like I was finally home. The next morning, as my father and I sat down for breakfast, I noticed something different in his eyes, a glimmer of hope, a spark that hadn't been there before. I knew that things wouldn't always be easy, but we were on the right path. Together, we would rebuild what had been lost, piece by piece. And maybe, just maybe, we could start a new chapter in our lives. "You look like you're in a better mood today," my father said, offering me a smile as he poured himself a cup of coffee. I smiled back. I think I'm finally starting to let go of the past." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's a long road, Lily, but I'm proud of you, proud of what you've done for this family." I didn't have the words to express how much that meant to me, so I simply nodded. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew that as long as we had each other, we could face whatever came our way. And in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened, I was ready for it. Because the hardest battles were behind me, and now I could finally begin to live again. As the days turned into weeks, life in the house began to feel almost normal again. There were moments of quiet contentment, dinners with my father, where we could talk without the heavy tension that had once plagued our conversations. The air felt lighter, the weight of the past finally beginning to lift. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt so at ease, so free. But even as the calm settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. There were nights when I would lie awake, the silence of the house pressing down on me, and I would wonder if everything I had fought for was truly enough. The business was stable, my father was starting to heal, and Jessica was long gone. But my mind kept wandering back to one question: had I truly won? There was one more person who needed closure, one more chapter to close. It wasn't Jessica, not anymore. It was me. I had spent so much time battling for control, fighting to take back what had been stolen, but in the process, I had forgotten something crucial. I hadn't given myself the time to heal, to truly move on. It wasn't just about the family business or the house. It was about me, about my own growth, my own future. I realized now that I had to let go of the anger, the resentment. I had to forgive myself for the things I couldn't control, the decisions I had made out of desperation. But it wasn't easy. I still found myself drawn to the past, haunted by the memories of what had happened. Jessica's manipulation, my father's vulnerability, the feeling of being betrayed. It was hard to forget those scars, no matter how much I tried to move forward. One day, as I sat in my father's study, going over some legal documents for the business, I heard a knock on the door. I glanced up, expecting to see one of the staff, but to my surprise, it was my father. "Lily," he began, his voice a little hesitant, as though he were unsure how to approach me. "There's something I need to talk to you about." I looked at him, surprised by the seriousness in his tone. "What's going on, Dad?" He sat down across from me, a long sigh escaping his lips. "I've been thinking a lot lately about everything that happened with Jessica, and about how you've been holding everything together. You've done so much for this family, Lily. You've been stronger than I could have ever expected." I felt a lump form in my throat, but I swallowed it back, trying to keep my composure. "Dad, I did what needed to be done. We did what needed to be done." He nodded, but there was a sad, almost regretful look in his eyes. "You know, there's something I never told you, something I should have said a long time ago. I've been holding on to it, but maybe it's time you knew the truth." My heart skipped a beat. "What truth, Dad?" He leaned forward, his voice soft but heavy with the weight of what he was about to say. "When your mother passed away, I didn't know how to cope. I was lost. Jessica came into our lives, and she seemed like the answer. She was there when I needed someone, and I let her in. I thought I was doing what was best for you, for the family. But I was wrong. I was too weak, too blinded by my own grief to see it. And I'm sorry for everything." I sat there, stunned, the words sinking in. It wasn't just Jessica who had betrayed us. It was also my father's inability to see the truth sooner. The pain of his admission hit me like a wave. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung. It was the fact that he had been as much a victim as I had. We had both been manipulated, both been blinded by our grief, and neither of us had been able to see the full picture until it was almost too late. "Dad, I started, my voice breaking slightly. "You don't have to apologize. You did what you thought was right at the time. We both made mistakes, but we're here now. We can fix this." He reached out, placing a hand over mine. "I know, Lily, but I can't keep pretending like it doesn't hurt. I've lost so much, and I don't want to lose you too." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them away. "You haven't lost me, Dad. I'm still here, we're still here. And we'll get through this together." The conversation was heavy, but it was also a turning point. We had both faced the truth, and for the first time in years, I felt like we could start healing. The past couldn't be undone, but it didn't have to define our future. Later that evening, my father and I sat together in the living room, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. For once, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't filled with tension or regret. It was peaceful. The weight of everything that had happened still lingered, but it no longer felt like it was suffocating us. It was just part of the story now, part of our journey. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of clarity. I knew what I needed to do. It was time to make peace with my past, with the things I couldn't change. I had spent so much time fighting for justice, for revenge, for control. But now, it was time to fight for something else, my future. I called my father into the study, and together, we started making plans for the future of the family business. This time, it wasn't about getting back at anyone. It wasn't about revenge. It was about building something new, something stronger, something that would honor my mother's memory. As I looked at my father, his face filled with resolve and hope, I realized that we had both come a long way. We had faced the darkest moments of our lives, and we had survived. We were no longer defined by the past, we were building something better together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. Weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, my father and I continued to rebuild not just the family business but our lives. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer controlled us. We had learned to move forward, to accept that the past couldn't be erased, but it didn't have to define our future either. We had come to understand that healing wasn't linear. It wasn't about wiping the slate clean. It was about learning from what had happened and using it to build something better. The family business, which had once been on the brink of collapse, was beginning to thrive again. Slowly but surely, we regained the trust of the people we had once worked with, and I felt a renewed sense of pride in the work we were doing. There were still hurdles to overcome, legal matters, renegotiating contracts, and mending relationships, but we were on the right path. And for the first time in a long while, I could see the future stretching out before me, full of possibilities. I had also found a new sense of purpose outside the business. I began to volunteer at a local charity that focused on helping women who had been through situations similar to my own. It felt cathartic, almost healing, to give back in a way that helped others who had been manipulated or mistreated. I hadn't realized how much I needed that connection to people who understood the depth of betrayal and the strength it took to rise above it. It reminded me that I wasn't alone, and it was one of the few places where I could talk openly about everything that had happened, without judgment. One evening, after a long day at work, my father and I sat down for dinner. The house felt warm and alive, with the kind of quiet that only came when things were truly at peace. The table was set simply, but it felt like the most luxurious meal we'd had in a long time. "So, Lily," my father said, his voice tinged with curiosity as he took a bite of his meal. "What's next for you, for us?" I paused, my fork midair. The question had caught me off guard, not because I didn't know the answer, but because for the first time, I realized how far I had come. "I think," I began, taking a deep breath, "it's time for me to start focusing on what I want for myself. Not just the business, not just the past. I've spent so much time fighting for everything we've lost, for everything that was taken from us. But I think it's time to start thinking about the future, about what I can build for myself, outside of all this." My father smiled, a soft, proud expression on his face. "I think that's a good idea, Lily. You've carried this family on your shoulders for so long. You deserve to think about your own happiness now. Whatever you decide, I'll support you." I smiled back at him, the weight of his words sinking in. I didn't need his approval. I had already made up my mind. But hearing him say that he was proud of me, hearing him acknowledge everything I had done for our family, made the journey worthwhile. For so long, I had felt like I was fighting alone, like the burden of the past was mine to carry. But now, I understood that I wasn't alone. My father and I were partners in this, partners in rebuilding, in moving forward, in healing. That night, I stayed up late, reflecting on the path I had taken. I had spent so much time in the darkness, consumed by anger, fear, and a desire for revenge. I had fought to protect what was mine, to reclaim what was taken. But now, it felt like that chapter was closing. It was time for a new one. The next morning, I called a meeting with the board of the family business. It was time to make some decisions. The company had grown under my father's leadership, but it was time to take it in a new direction. One that would honor the work my mother had started, but also reflect the changes I had gone through, the growth I had experienced. "We've come a long way," I began, standing at the head of the table, looking around at the faces of the board members. "And while we've made great strides, I think it's time we focus on something more than just profitability. We need to think about legacy, about the impact we have on this community. It's time to take the values my mother instilled in us and make them a priority again. And it's time for me to take a more active role in shaping the future of this company." There was a pause in the room as the board members exchanged glances, but no one spoke out. They were listening. And for the first time, I felt like they were truly listening to me, to my vision for the future. "I know it's a shift in direction," I continued, "but I believe it's what this company needs. We've been through a lot, and now it's time to give back. It's time to make an impact that goes beyond our bottom line." The meeting went well. By the end of it, we had a plan in place to focus on community-driven initiatives, sustainability, and corporate social responsibility. It felt like a weight had been lifted, and I felt more connected to the company than ever before. This was no longer just about recovering what had been lost. It was about creating something better, something that would stand the test of time. As I walked out of the meeting room, I felt a sense of pride swelling in my chest. For so long, I had been focused on the past, on what had been taken from me. But now, I was looking ahead. And for the first time, I felt truly in control of my own future. Later that afternoon, I sat down at my desk and opened the window to let the fresh air in. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the city. I looked out over the skyline, feeling the weight of the journey behind me. But I also felt a sense of peace, a sense of purpose. I had faced my demons. I had fought for what was rightfully mine, and now it was time to build something new. The future awaited, and I was ready for it. The days that followed felt like a new chapter had begun, one where the pages were crisp and untouched, waiting to be filled. The past, though still there in the quiet corners of my mind, no longer defined me. I had spent so long running from it, trying to outrun the shadows of betrayal and loss. But now, I realized that it was no longer the weight I carried. It was the foundation from which I was rebuilding my life. With the business now shifting focus towards a more community-driven approach, I spent my days overseeing new initiatives that would make a real difference in the lives of those around us. We launched programs aimed at helping women rebuild after difficult circumstances, much like I had, and committed a portion of our profits to environmental sustainability. My father was proud, though he still took a step back, content to let me lead. He had learned to trust me completely, something I had longed for but never knew how badly I needed until I had it. But even as I dedicated myself to the future, I knew that some scars would never fully fade. My mother's absence would always be felt, the space she left behind too large to fill. Still, I found peace in knowing that I was honoring her memory in a way that truly mattered. This wasn't about proving something to her or living up to her legacy. It was about carrying it forward in a way that was authentic to me, to us. One day, as I walked through the office, observing the growth of our new programs and the team I had assembled around me, I found myself standing by the window overlooking the city. It had been months since everything changed, and yet it felt like yesterday. There was a calmness to it now, a quiet satisfaction that I hadn't known I was missing. I was no longer the person I had been when this all began, the desperate, angry daughter who had fought for what was hers. I was someone new, someone who had learned to build, to forgive, and to lead. "Lily!" A voice broke me from my thoughts. I turned around to see my father standing there, looking at me with a gentle smile. His face was older now, softer, but in his eyes I saw the same pride I had always hoped for, the same trust. I smiled back at him. "Yes, Dad. I just wanted to say, thank you," he said quietly, "for everything. You've brought this family back together. You've given me a reason to keep going. I don't think I could have done it without you." I felt a lump in my throat, but I held it in, not wanting to let the emotions spill out. "You don't have to thank me," I said, my voice steady. "We've been through so much together and we're still here. That's what matters." For the first time in a long time, we stood there together, in the calm of the evening, looking at the world outside. We had survived. We had rebuilt. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't just the daughter trying to reclaim what had been taken from her. I was a woman, strong, capable, and ready to face whatever the future had in store. I had faced my demons, fought my battles, and come out the other side not just intact, but stronger. The future was unwritten, full of unknowns, but it was mine to shape. The journey wasn't over, it had just begun. And I knew, deep in my heart, that whatever came next, I was ready. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer held me captive. The life I was building was mine, free from the chains of betrayal, of loss. It was a life built on resilience, on hope, and most importantly, on love. I had walked through the fire and come out the other side. And now, it was time to live the life I had always deserved. The future awaited. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid.